On June 6, 1944, the beginning of the end of World War II was marked by the Allied invasion of Normandy. This was the amphibious assault on the German heavily fortified Atlantic Wall. The size and scope of this fortification was never seen before and has never been seen since. Over 5,000 ships, vessels, and craft, whatever they were, who knows? I'm sure some of my Navy brethren and sistren could name them, were utilized in this invasion. Basically, they're all boats to me and everybody else. 175,000 men and many, many years of preparation went into what is considered a logistical masterpiece. The valor and honor displayed during this invasion is well documented, but there are many lesser known facts that are integral in the story of D-Day and the invasion. One such lesser known fact is that of the downed P-51 pilot. The Luftwaffe were virtually non-existent at the invasion, as the Allies had significant air superiority in the area. But given the absolutely massive amount of shells that were exchanged, the rounds, there were some friendly fire incidences that occurred. And most people don't know, but friendly fire in large-scale combat operations is actually fairly commonplace. There were some small Allied planes that were spotting for ships that actually took some of this friendly fire. Notably, a P-51 pilot was shot down. It's kind of funny. He was found in his Class A uniform holding a bottle of whiskey, and he was reportedly, quote-unquote, mad as hell. He actually had a date planned for London that night. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You're just supposed to do one Passover and hit the town with your lady, and then bam, out of nowhere, you're getting shot down by the boys. At least he had some whiskey to make it a little easier. Then you had Operation Fortitude. Now, deception was absolutely paramount when it came to this operation. Okay, they couldn't just go in as basically a frontal assault. They needed some things along the way. Some flanking elements. Well, maybe that's not the correct term, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, they needed something more than just a bunch of boats launching to distract the enemy. Operation Fortitude's mission was to convince Hitler that the Allies were attacking from somewhere else. This is very common practice in war. Okay, you don't want the enemy to know where you're going to hit them hardest. They wanted the enemy elements to believe that the actual invasion was a feint. This was a joint British-American operation. There were fake radio calls, dummy armies, a lot of covert ops, fake everything, basically, to make the enemy elements, to make Hitler think that the actual invasion was a feint. The first U.S. Army group, which was made up of both real and notional units, was commanded by the one and only General Patton. This army was made up of inflatable and papier-mâché tanks, intentionally poorly camouflaged landing craft, and phony docks, all indicating that the invasion would take place somewhere else. The Pas de Calais. By the end of May 1944, the Germans all believed that the invasion would occur at the Pas de Calais, and I'm probably saying that wrong. I feel like I often mispronounce things, but my last name is von Letkemann. That is Vonletkemann, and it has never been pronounced correctly in my life, so I don't feel that bad. When the invasion began on June 6th, the Germans actually thought that the invasion of Normandy, they thought that invasion was a feint to distract from another real invasion. So the operation was a success. They did deceive the Germans. Operation Fortitude was very much integral to the success of Operation Overlord. It was the primary reason why there was a lack of German presence, or a lack of as significant a German presence, on D-Day. Many, many people do not know that the SAS, or British Special Operators, were heavily involved in the invasion. Just after midnight, the two teams for each SAS operators jumped in, right out of an airplane, a perfectly good airplane. They jumped into separate locations at Normandy with 500 dummy paratroopers, a record player, and pistols. Just pistols. The dummy parachutists would actually self-destruct on impact, and the record player was used to create distracting noise, the sound of service members talking, guns firing, stuff like that in the area. The tactic worked. A German element of about 2,000 to 2,200 troops spent hours looking through a forest for what they believed was a very large element of paratroopers. Operation Tiger is the next one that I'm going to talk about. And it has, in my opinion, the coolest name out of everything I'm going to talk about today. To the Americans, the war in Europe began in earnest on June 6th. But the conflict had been raging for some period of time up to that point, obviously, especially leading up to Operation Overlord. In April of 1944, the Allies were conducting their own operation. It was a training exercise codenamed Tiger, and it was a training exercise specifically to train up for amphibious landings. German E-boats infiltrated the exercise and caused the deaths or injury to 1,000 service members, and this is very significant. The casualties here were 20 times as many as were found on Utah Beach on the day of the actual operation. General Teddy Roosevelt Jr. actually played a massive role. And if you're wondering why that name sounds so familiar, yes, it is that Teddy Roosevelt Jr. He wasn't the only general officer to storm the beaches that day, but he was the only son of a president. He was 56, he had a bad heart, he had to use a cane, and he was among the first to hit the beaches in a boat. Instead of wearing a helmet, he wore a knit cap because apparently he did not like helmets. And quite frankly, I've never read about somebody and immediately had more respect for them than this individual. Now, there were some significant currents in the water that day, so much so that it pushed the Allies a mile off the location they wanted to be at. No matter to General Roosevelt, he was famously quoted saying, "We'll start the war from right here." Never a more legendary quote have I read or recited. Bicycles actually played a heavy role in this military operation. Thousands of British troops used bicycles to travel around at high speeds, which had to have been like a nostalgic bringing back of a childhood with your buddies as you're looking for enemy elements to schwack. An American commander allegedly tried to bring a bicycle, and his troops threw it out of the plane as they were flying to the location. Canadians also utilized bicycles, and that will probably shock nobody if you know anything about Canadians. A large majority of the bikes were discarded at sea or left on the beach, but there were some special operators that were able to bring the bikes along with them. Bombing missions were absolutely vital, and there were a number of bombing campaigns planned. They wanted to cripple German defenses, cripple critical infrastructure, all the good stuff that you want your bombers to do before they invaded. However, the Allies, wanting to ensure that they secured the element of surprise with their feint, they actually held off until troops were actually in their landing craft on the way to the beach. Unfortunately, there was significant cloud cover and wind, and because of this, both the paratroopers that they were sending out landed off course, and the bombs hit close to nothing, leaving the fortifications on the beach pretty much entirely intact. The Coast Guard was heavily involved in the invasion. Who would have thought? We actually found them. They did primarily delivery services for soldiers and Marines, where they delivered the soldiers and Marines to deal death on the battlefield. They also patrolled for submarines, and they aided in search and rescue. They saved countless lives in the English Channel, and many service members who were drowning or wounded, they scooped them up and they got them where they needed to go to receive medical attention or get back in the fight. Rescue swimmers actually operated from 83-foot cutters, and they were nicknamed the Matchstick Fleet because the boats were entirely made of wood. The American writing legend Hemingway actually witnessed the invasion with his own eyes. Okay, he was there. And he wanted to be on the beaches, but U.S. officials did not want to risk the very well-known writer's life. After Normandy, he actually kind of snuck away. And as the Allies approached Paris, he actually ended up leading an element of the French resistance in the area. This led him to be charged under the Geneva Conventions because he did not have authorization or authority to lead armed troops, and he beat the charges simply by saying, "I was just offering advice to the Frenchmen." The British were not the only ones that failed to achieve their objectives. Nearly every element failed to achieve 100% the objective that it was tasked with, the mission that it was tasked with in the invasion. That being said, the British had the best excuse. After assaulting the beach, moving past the German line, they stopped and they brewed some tea. The Canadians saw them and thought, well, that's a great idea. I'd like a cup. Oh, a steaming cup of tea in the middle of the invasion? That's exactly what a thirsty warfighter needs. The German defeat on D-Day was definitely the beginning of the end of the war. However, if the Germans had had their stuff together, probably would have been very different. Operation Fortitude and air superiority can be noted for Allied success, but the Germans shot themselves in the foot in quite a few ways that day. General Rommel and the German command were so certain that the invasion would not take place that they actually scheduled exercises 100 miles away from the beach. And the exercises were scheduled on June 6th. For those of you that don't know, lacking leadership, lacking command is absolutely one of the worst things that you can do to a military operation, especially a military operation where you're going to have young troops fighting. Okay, and there were a lot of people there. There were probably a lot of young people there. A lot of troops in general. You need somebody holding everything together. You absolutely need it. The value of good leadership or present leadership cannot be understated. Massive German confusion, Allied paralandings all over the place. You got people falling out of the sky, literally, and French resistance cutting communication lines, effectively paralyzed German defenses. German command structure was atrocious as well, and this is a massive problem even in today's militaries. There was severe distrust between Hitler and his generals. Just as an example, one of the field commanders for the Germans obviously knew the assault was happening, and he tried to order 2 armor elements to move in to defend or attack. Unfortunately, Hitler had ordered that those elements be under his direct command, nobody else's. Hitler was asleep at the time, and his aide was literally too scared to wake him up, and so they did not even begin moving until 1600. All of this culminated in Germany not mounting an effective counterattack. Hitler then chose to fire his very much feared V-1 rockets at London as a form of retaliation, instead of firing them at the things that were delivering troops that were battering his forces. The bulk of defenses were made up of Ost battalions, with the absolute best German troops being in a completely different area. The best German troops were defending the Eastern Front or defending the location of the Allies' actual feint. This forced the Germans to use a ragtag bunch of POWs, Russians, the Polish, and a bunch of like POWs essentially was a bulk of the force in an effort to defend themselves. None of these elements were eager to fight for the Germans. They didn't really have an interest in perishing for their captors. When given the opportunity, they would surrender to the Allies, and they would essentially only fight if the Germans had a gun to their head. And in many cases, the conscripts would actually turn on their German captors and then in an effort to secure the ability to surrender. The Germans who were on the Western Front were very old men, disabled veterans, and young boys. And on top of all of that, this Atlantic wall that they had built, this supposedly impenetrable defense, had no depth whatsoever. As soon as they broke through that first line, there was nothing to hamper the Allies' movements. Not related to the German failure, but Hitler and his high command actually pretended that they knew the invasion was coming at the location that it did the entire time. The level of ego is atrocious. It is reported, though, that they were relieved when it finally did come, because that meant the final battle had begun. I want to thank you so much for watching this video on an absolutely crucial piece of American and, quite frankly, world history. D-Day is a spectacular, Spectacular display of operational success and a lot of moving elements that all worked together beautifully. Thank you very much. I'm Mandatory Fun Day, and I hope to see you again for the next video.